150,000 people. That's how many attended Hillsong churches globally at the movement's peak in 2019. 150,000 worshipers across 30 countries singing Hillsong songs, buying Hillsong merchandise, following Hillsong pastors on Instagram, and believing they were part of the most influential church movement in modern Christianity. The church that created the worship music playing in your sanctuary. The church that pioneered Instagram Christianity. The church that made cool Christian culture mainstream. Then it all collapsed. In 3 years, Hillsong lost over half its global attendance. Major campuses closed. Celebrity pastors resigned in scandal. Criminal investigations were launched. The founder was exposed for covering up his father's child abuse. The global brand that seemed unstoppable imploded so completely that by 2024, Hillsong's future existence was in question. But here's what nobody's investigated until now. What actually happened to those 150,000 people? Where did they go when Hillsong collapsed? Did they find new churches? Did they leave Christianity entirely? Did they lose their faith watching the empire they trusted crumble? I spent 6 months tracking former Hillsong members across 5 countries. I interviewed dozens of former attendees, staff members, and pastors. I analyzed attendance data, financial records, and social media to map the exodus. And what I discovered is a story of mass disillusionment, spiritual trauma, and a generation questioning everything they were taught about church, leadership, and celebrity Christianity. Today, we're investigating the Hillsong collapse and what happened to the people left behind. If you want to understand the most dramatic megachurch implosion in modern history and what it reveals about the future of evangelicalism, subscribe now. Because the Hillsong story isn't just about one church. It's about what happens when celebrity culture, spiritual abuse, and institutional corruption collide, and thousands of people's faith is collateral damage. To understand the collapse, you need to understand how high Hillsong climbed. Founded in Sydney, Australia in 1983 by Brian Houston, Hillsong became the most influential Pentecostal church in the world. Their worship music defined contemporary Christian worship globally. Oceans, What a Beautiful Name, Shout to the Lord, songs written and recorded by Hillsong teams became the soundtrack of evangelical Christianity. Every Sunday, millions of Christians worldwide sang Hillsong songs without knowing they were singing Hillsong songs. The music created a global brand and generated tens of millions in royalties annually. But Hillsong was more than music. It was a lifestyle brand. Hillsong Church became synonymous with cool Christianity. Celebrity attendees like Justin Bieber, Selena Gomez, and Chris Pratt made headlines. Hillsong pastors dressed like fashion influencers, posted aspirational lifestyle content on Instagram, and built personal brands that rivaled secular celebrities. The church's aesthetic was carefully curated. Modern architecture, concert-quality production, trendy graphics, and staff who looked like they stepped out of fashion magazines. This wasn't your grandmother's Pentecostal church. This was Christianity for the Instagram generation. The expansion was aggressive. Hillsong planted campuses in major cities worldwide. London, New York, Los Angeles, Paris, Copenhagen, and Cape Town. Each campus attracted thousands with slick marketing, celebrity connections, and the promise of belonging to something global and significant. By 2019, Hillsong wasn't just a church. It was an empire, multi-campus, multinational, multi-million-dollar budget. And Brian Houston, the founder and global senior pastor, was treated like a Christian celebrity CEO whose vision was reshaping global Christianity. The peak was dizzying. The fall was catastrophic. The first visible crack appeared in 2020 when Carl Lentz, pastor of Hillsong New York and one of the movement's most prominent faces, was fired for moral failure, including adultery. Carl had been Hillsong's American star, friend to celebrities, Instagram influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, and the cool pastor who made Christianity seem relevant. His fall shocked the Hillsong world, but it was just the beginning. In 2021, multiple former Hillsong staff members came forward with allegations of spiritual abuse, toxic workplace culture, and leadership misconduct across multiple campuses. Former volunteers described being worked to exhaustion without pay, guilt-tripped into serving, and discarded when they burned out. Former staff members described bullying, intimidation, and retaliation for raising concerns. The stories painted a picture of an organization that prioritized growth and image over people's well-being. Then came the revelations about Brian Houston himself. In 2021, Australian authorities charged him with concealing his father's child sexual abuse. Frank Houston, Brian's father and Hillsong's original founder, had sexually abused multiple boys in the 1970s. Brian had known since 1999 but never reported it to police. He'd quietly removed his father from ministry but allowed him to retire with a payout and kept the abuse secret for years. The charges against Brian were eventually dropped on a technicality. But the damage was done. The man who'd built Hillsong and presented himself as a moral leader had covered up heinous crimes to protect his father and the church's reputation. Survivors of Frank Houston's abuse spoke publicly about the betrayal and the decades of suffering while Hillsong covered it up and continued growing. Then, in 2022, more allegations emerged. Brian Houston had allegedly behaved inappropriately with women over the years. There were questions about church finances, about lavish spending, about whether donated money was funding lifestyles rather than ministry. Brian resigned as global senior pastor in March 2022. The founder, the face, the architect of Hillsong was gone. And without him, the empire began to crumble. Campuses started closing. First Dallas, then Phoenix, then several international locations. Attendance at remaining campuses plummeted. The financial model that depended on constant growth collapsed when growth reversed. By 2024, Hillsong had closed or sold 15 of its 16 U.S. campuses. The global network that once seemed unstoppable was in free fall. Subscribe now if you're wondering where all those people went, because I tracked them down and their stories reveal something profound about faith after disillusionment. I'll share what I found. The 150,000 Hillsong members scattered in multiple directions, and each category tells a different story. The first and largest group, about 40%, are what I'm calling church refugees. They left Hillsong but stayed in Christianity. They found new churches, usually smaller, less flashy, more traditional ones. A woman named Sarah attended Hillsong London for 7 years. She loved the worship, the community, and the sense of being part of something significant. When the scandals broke, she was devastated. She said it felt like discovering your family had been lying to you. She tried staying through the first few scandals, hoping Hillsong would address the problems and reform. But as more revelations emerged and leadership repeatedly minimized concerns and attacked critics, she realized the rot was institutional, not individual. She left in 2022 and eventually found a small Anglican church in her neighborhood. She said the transition was jarring. No concert lighting, no celebrity pastors, no Instagram-perfect aesthetic. Just ordinary people gathering for liturgical worship. At first it felt boring after Hillsong's excitement, but over time she found it grounding. The lack of performance felt more authentic. The quiet reverence felt more sacred than manufactured hype. Hundreds of former Hillsong members I spoke with echoed her story. They're in Baptist churches, Presbyterian churches, non-denominational churches, anywhere that feels less like a production and more like a community. They're suspicious of celebrity pastors now. They avoid megachurches. They look for churches with accountability structures, financial transparency, and leadership that doesn't center itself. Many describe their new churches as smaller, older, less cool, but also healthier, safer, and more sustainable. They didn't lose faith in Christianity. They lost faith in Hillsong's model of Christianity. And they're rebuilding their faith in contexts that feel more honest even if less exciting. The second group, roughly 30%, are what I'm calling spiritual nomads. They left Hillsong but haven't found a new church home. They're still Christian, theoretically. They believe in God. They pray occasionally. They might watch sermons online. But they're not attending anywhere regularly. They're spiritually homeless. A man named Marcus attended Hillsong New York for 5 years. He volunteered extensively, served on multiple teams, and was deeply involved. When the Carl Lentz scandal broke, Marcus felt betrayed. The pastor he'd admired and learned from had been living a double life. The church that preached authenticity had been hiding systemic problems. Marcus left Hillsong but found himself unable to trust another church. He's visited several in the 3 years since leaving. Each time, he found himself analyzing the pastor's motives, questioning the financial practices, and wondering what was being hidden. He said, "Once you've been burned that badly, it's hard to trust any religious institution again. You assume everyone's hiding something." Marcus represents thousands of former Hillsong members who are wounded, suspicious, and spiritually adrift. They want community and connection but can't bring themselves to commit to another church that might fail them the same way. Many described watching church online occasionally, consuming Christian content on social media, and maintaining individual spiritual practices. But organized church feels unsafe. They've been hurt too badly to risk it again. Some eventually find healing and reconnect with church communities. Others remain nomadic for years, maybe permanently. This is the hidden cost of Hillsong's collapse. Not just the people who left Christianity entirely, but the people who stayed Christian but can no longer fully participate in Christian community because their trust was destroyed. The third group, about 20%, are the deconstructors. They left Hillsong and are deconstructing their faith entirely. Some are becoming progressive Christians who reject evangelical theology. Others are becoming agnostic or atheist. Still others describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. A woman named Emily attended Hillsong Sydney for 10 years. She met her husband there, had her children dedicated there, and built her entire social life around the church. When the scandals broke, it triggered a complete faith crisis for her. She said if Hillsong, which seemed so spirit-led and blessed by God, was actually covering up abuse and exploitation, how do you know any church is really what it claims? How do you trust that God is actually working when the most successful, influential church in the world turns out to be corrupt? Emily started questioning everything. Was her worship experience real or manufactured? Were her spiritual encounters genuine or emotional manipulation? Was any of it true? She started researching church history, reading theology, and exploring doubts she'd never allowed herself to consider while at Hillsong. 3 years later, she no longer identifies as evangelical. She's not sure what she believes about Jesus, the Bible, or Christianity itself. She's in what's called deconstruction, the process of dismantling inherited belief systems. Some people deconstruct and reconstruct a different kind of faith. Others deconstruct all the way out of Christianity. Emily's still in process and doesn't know where she'll land. Thousands of former Hillsong members are on similar journeys. The collapse of their church became a catalyst for questioning everything they'd been taught. Some will reconstruct faith eventually. Others won't. But Hillsong's failure planted seeds of doubt that grew into major faith crises. The fourth group, about 10%, simply disappeared from Christianity entirely. Not through dramatic deconstruction but through quiet drift. They left Hillsong and never went back to church anywhere. They stopped identifying as Christian. They moved on. A man named Jake attended Hillsong Los Angeles casually for 3 years. He wasn't deeply involved, just attended Sunday services when it fit his schedule. When Hillsong LA closed, he didn't bother finding another church. He said Hillsong was convenient and entertaining, but once it was gone, he realized he didn't actually need church in his life. Jake represents the shallowest layer of Hillsong's attendance, people who attended for community, aesthetics, or celebrity connections, not deep faith commitment. When Hillsong imploded, they had no reason to find another church because their connection was never really to Christianity. It was to Hillsong's brand. Thousands fell into this category, casual attenders who were never discipled, never integrated into Christian community beyond attending services, and never developed faith that could survive institutional failure. They were consumers of religious experience, not committed believers. When the product they consumed disappeared, they just found other products. They're not angry or deconstructing. They're just gone, and they probably won't come back. This group reveals Hillsong's fundamental failure. They attracted massive crowds but didn't make disciples. They created consumers, not committed Christians. When the brand collapsed, the consumers moved on because they were never really connected to Jesus. They were connected to Hillsong, and Hillsong is gone. This is the legacy of celebrity church and entertainment Christianity. Big crowds, little depth. When crisis comes, the shallow-rooted disappear. Hillsong's spectacular growth was matched by equally spectacular shallowness. And now we're seeing the result. The Hillsong collapse proves that the celebrity church model is unsustainable and dangerous. Building a church around charismatic personalities, whether Brian Houston or Carl Lentz or any pastor celebrity, creates systemic vulnerability. When the celebrity falls, the whole structure collapses, because people weren't following Jesus. They were following the celebrity who told them about Jesus. Hillsong's entire model depended on personality. The global brand was built on Brian Houston's vision and leadership. Individual campuses were built around celebrity pastors who cultivated personal followings. The music was marketed through celebrity worship leaders. Everything centered on personalities. This created the conditions for abuse. Celebrity pastors had enormous power and minimal accountability. Boards existed to support their vision, not provide oversight. Staff and volunteers were expected to serve the celebrity's ministry uncritically. Questioning leadership was treated as disloyalty or lack of faith. This dynamic enables predatory behavior, financial misconduct, and spiritual abuse. Because celebrities aren't held to normal standards. They're protected, defended, and given benefit of the doubt long past when accountability should kick in. The celebrity church model also creates shallow discipleship. People attend for the experience, the music, the production, the connection to someone famous. They're not being taught deep theology or challenged to costly discipleship. They're being entertained and made to feel part of something special. When the celebrity or the experience disappoints, they leave. Because their faith was never rooted in Christ. It was rooted in the celebrity and the experience. Hillsong's collapse should kill the celebrity church model permanently. But it probably won't. Because churches and leaders are already trying to rebuild similar models. Celebrity pastors are rebranding and starting new churches. The worship industrial complex continues churning out celebrity worship leaders. We haven't learned the lesson. And more Hillsongs will rise and fall until we do. Hillsong's collapse also exposes the worship industrial complex and its problems. Hillsong pioneered the model of church as worship music producer. They created albums, went on tours, and generated massive revenue from worship music. This worked brilliantly for Hillsong. The music created global brand recognition and funding that sustained their expansion. But it also corrupted their mission. Hillsong became a business first and a church second. Worship wasn't primarily about encountering God. It was about producing content that could be sold. Songs were written with commercial appeal in mind. Worship leaders were groomed to be celebrities who could sell albums and fill arenas. The worship experiences were designed for maximum emotional impact and Instagram aesthetics, not necessarily for authentic spiritual formation. This model has now spread throughout evangelicalism. Churches see worship music as a revenue stream and branding opportunity. Worship leaders are treated like celebrities and marketed accordingly. The lines between worship and entertainment, between sacred and commercial, have blurred completely. Hillsong's collapse should prompt serious questions about this model. Is it healthy for churches to be music businesses? Is it wise to make worship leaders into celebrities? Does commercial success in worship music correlate with spiritual health or institutional corruption? The Hillsong story suggests the worship industrial complex is spiritually dangerous. It creates incentives that distort ministry. It elevates people beyond what they can handle. It prioritizes production value over authentic worship. And when it collapses, thousands of people's faith is damaged. We need to rethink how we do worship. Smaller, simpler, less produced, less commercial, more focused on God and less on creating experiences that can be marketed. Hillsong's worship music blessed millions. But the system that produced it was rotten. We need to acknowledge that and change course. Perhaps the most important revelation from Hillsong's collapse is the epidemic of spiritual abuse in megachurches. Former Hillsong members consistently describe environments where manipulation, exploitation, and abuse were normalized. Volunteers pressured to serve beyond healthy limits. Staff worked to burn out and discarded when they couldn't continue. Questions and concerns shut down with spiritual language. Critics labeled divisive, bitter, or under spiritual attack. This is spiritual abuse, using religious authority and language to manipulate, control, and harm people. And it's rampant in celebrity megachurches like Hillsong. The size and pace of growth create conditions for abuse. When churches prioritize rapid expansion, they cut corners on care. People become resources to fuel the machine rather than souls to shepherd. The lack of accountability enables abuse. In churches with celebrity pastors and weak boards, there's no one to stop abusive practices. Staff who raise concerns are fired. Members who ask questions are pushed out. The system protects itself by eliminating critics. The spiritual language makes it harder to recognize and resist. Abuse is framed as spiritual warfare. Exhaustion is framed as persecution for righteousness. Questioning is framed as lack of faith. People doubt their own perceptions because everything is spiritualized. Hillsong's collapse has given survivors courage to speak. Former members are sharing their stories of spiritual abuse, exploitation, and trauma. Their testimonies reveal that Hillsong's problems weren't isolated incidents but systemic patterns. The entire model was abusive, built on using people to build the empire. The spiritual abuse epidemic extends beyond Hillsong. It's happening in megachurches and celebrity pastor churches across evangelicalism. Hillsong's visibility makes it a case study, but the dynamics exist wherever celebrity culture, rapid growth, and weak accountability combine. We must take spiritual abuse seriously, believe survivors, demand accountability, create structures that prevent abuse, and stop defending celebrity pastors just because their churches are large or their worship music is popular. So what's next for Hillsong and for the thousands of people affected by its collapse? Hillsong itself will likely continue to shrink. The Australian church remains, but its global influence is gone. The brand is toxic. The model is discredited. They'll survive as a large church in Sydney, but the empire is over. For the church refugees who found new communities, many will heal and rebuild healthy faith. Time, therapy, and better church environments can repair the damage. But it takes years, and some wounds may never fully heal. For the spiritual nomads still disconnected from church, the path forward is uncertain. Some will eventually trust again and reconnect. Others may remain permanently wary of organized religion. The church needs to reach them with patience and humility, not pressure. For the deconstructors questioning everything, their journeys will vary. Some will reconstruct progressive or contemplative versions of Christianity. Others will leave the faith entirely. We should listen to their questions rather than defensively attacking their doubts. For those who disappeared entirely, they're probably not coming back. The church failed them and they moved on. We should grieve that loss and learn from it. The broader question is whether evangelicalism will learn from Hillsong's collapse. Will we reject celebrity church culture? Will we prioritize discipleship over growth? Will we create accountability structures that prevent abuse? Or will we just wait for the next Hillsong to rise, enjoy the exciting growth, and act shocked when it implodes? History suggests we won't learn. We'll repeat the same patterns. Build empires around personalities. Prioritize production over formation. Ignore warning signs until catastrophic failure. But maybe this time will be different. Maybe Hillsong's collapse will be the wake-up call evangelicalism needs. We can hope. 150,000 people. They filled Hillsong churches across 30 countries. They sang the songs, followed the pastors, bought into the vision. And then it all collapsed. The celebrity pastors fell. The founder was exposed. The empire crumbled. And 150,000 people had to figure out what to do with their faith. 40% found new churches and are rebuilding. 30% are spiritually homeless, wounded, and wandering. 20% are deconstructing their faith entirely. 10% just disappeared and probably won't come back. The Hillsong collapse is one of the most dramatic megachurch implosions in modern history. But it's not unique. The patterns that destroyed Hillsong, celebrity culture, spiritual abuse, financial corruption, lack of accountability, exist across evangelicalism. More collapses are coming. More empires will fall. More thousands of people will have their faith shattered when the institutions they trusted are exposed as hollow. Here's what we must learn. Stop building churches around celebrities. Stop treating worship leaders like rock stars. Stop prioritizing growth over discipleship. Stop protecting leaders at the expense of the vulnerable. Start creating real accountability. Start measuring success by transformation, not attendance. Start building churches that can survive the failure of any individual leader because they're built on Christ, not personality. Hillsong's collapse destroyed the faith of thousands. That blood is on the hands of leaders who built the empire knowing it was unsustainable. But it's also on the hands of everyone who defended the model, attacked the critics, and enabled the abuse by refusing to ask hard questions. If this investigation challenged you, convicted you, or opened your eyes to the cost of celebrity Christianity, subscribe now. Share this with church leaders who need to hear it. The Hillsong empire is gone. The question is what will build in its place. Will we repeat the same mistakes? Or will we finally learn that empires built on sand always collapse? And when they do, people's faith is the collateral damage we can't afford.